everybody, and thanks for your invitation. I hope that your conference is going well, and for what I see is like this, and I hope that your conference is useful to make a step forward in building a socialist organization and also in building a broad party in Britain, which is the task that we have almost everywhere and which the Fourth International is committed in the places where it exists. I had the idea to say something about the crisis in Europe and specifically say something about Southern Europe, which is the place I know more, and also the place which is now politically hot and where all the elements of the crisis are condensated. I'll be quite schematic because when speaking in English I can communicate few ideas but not develop very much these ideas, but anyway I hope that that's understandable for you. Well, I mean, I think that it's clear that almost 5 years after the beginning of the crisis is not stabilized at all, and the Cyprus situation last month is a good example of this. I think that it makes no sense now to talk a lot about the crisis. You're texting the conference to them, but there are some specific elements that we have to point out. For example, the fact that one of the historical novelties of this crisis is the intersection between the environmental crisis and the economic one, and this is something that has to be pointed out because not everybody understands the centrality of the environmental question today. And I think that it's clear that when we talk about the European Union, that the crisis has accentuated all the tensions that all the building of the European Union already had, and has created dynamics of sort of internal neo-colonialism or internal center-periphery dynamics inside the European Union. And, well, we can see how austerity policies are being implemented everywhere, but, well, when talking about austerity and social cuts, I think it's important to keep in mind that there is something beyond this. It's not just about social cuts, but what we're facing is an entire project to reorganize society, which is maybe it's not very coherent, it's not very planned, but capital has the idea to go out from the crisis with a different model of society and to change the social model that we used to know in Europe. And I think that we see how in all the continent let's say, North American style deregulated capitalism goes everywhere, and in Southern Europe, the deepening of this offensive makes that we can talk of a sort of Latin Americanization or even three-worldization of Southern Europe in terms of changing of social model. And the impact of this changing of social model is so brutal that in a certain way implies also changing of the political regime. And we are seeing clearly in Southern Europe how the democratic traditional mechanisms are imploding, traditional party systems are imploding, traditional representation mechanisms are imploding from inside, and we see a sort of oligarchic involution of parliamentary democracy. And because of the extreme subordination of politics to the interest of financial capital. And in Spain, Greece, Portugal, and so on, what began as an economic crisis, then it became a social one, and finally it has become also a deep political crisis. In the case of Greece, we have a deep hegemony crisis in which the ruling class has problems to keep the control of situation. And in Spain, what began as a mass rebellion against bankers and politicians, as the Indignados movement had as a slogan, has turned into a deep regime crisis. And all the institutional building that was set up in the 70s after dictatorship is beginning to have serious cracks in the walls. It's not collapsing yet, but the cracks in the walls begin to be very serious. The two main political parties are collapsing. Some institutions that used to be untouchable in Spain, like the monarchy, which is a little bit different from the British one, that till a few months ago it was even an institution that could not even be criticized by the press, for example, now its credibility is going down. And in particular in Spain, the breaking element of all the political dynamics is the explosion of the national question, in particular in Catalonia, that adds to the long-standing national conflict in the Basque Country. So this creates a dynamics of regime crisis, and in which the need of a new constituent process with a democratic and and social break to the current model becomes it's on the table. I think that if we talk more generally on what has happened in Europe in the last 2 years, well, it's clear that from 2001 onwards we have a new phase of social struggle, although I think it's very uneven, and only in peripheral countries, Mediterranean countries, some Eastern countries, only in these places the new phase of a struggle has become a real mass rebellion. But no matter the fact that it's uneven, I think it's clear that in the last 2 years we have a new wave of a new cycle, a new international cycle of resistance against austerity, although it has some geopolitical weaknesses. For example, when talking about Southern Europe, the two most important countries, France, Italy, have not yet entered in a Greek or Spanish or Portuguese type situation. The resistance is very strong, but in the periphery of the periphery. And that makes that the global strength of these dynamics of social struggle is still limited. I think also that we can point to some weaknesses that I think that the anti-capitalist left should be aware of this current dynamics of a struggle, is that although all new movements have had a very international dynamics, because in fact they arose from the Arab Spring. Without the Arab Spring there wouldn't be Indignados, and without Indignados we would have not had Occupy Wall Street and so on. In spite of this, the international coordination of new wave of movement is very weak. Even if we compare with the previous anti-globalization wave, where the anti-globalization movement created its own spaces, the World Social Forum and so on, now this is very weak. We have remainings of the former anti-globalization wave that still do initiatives, the Alta Summit and so on, but they're weak. But the new movements, well, they organized 15 October in 2011 and so on, but there is a lack of international framework to coordinate important initiatives. For the next 1st of June, the Portuguese movement is trying to organize a European Day of Action. I think that we should take this seriously, at least in Spain, Greece and so on, to try to be more effective in the coordination of international struggles, which I think is one of the key elements, given that the ETUC is not going to do this. I think that if we analyze all the dynamic of resistance, it's clear that the dynamic is very defensive. Sometimes it's even disparate. We have even physical attempts to avoid evictions, to avoid the approval of austerity budgets and so on. And clearly the new wave of struggle is developing in a very uneven and unfavorable balance of forces. But in the same time, there are elements of counter-attack, counter-offensive and so on. And for example, if we take the Spanish example, 2 years after M15 2011, from one side the movement didn't gain anything. All the battles were lost, no important victory, no anything. But on the other side, the fact that the movement emerged create a very big politicization of society, and also make people feel that they are able, maybe not to win, but they are able to fight. I mean, people is much more confident 2 years after the beginning of the movement than before the movement, although no victories have been done. I think that in spite that the movement is not strong to gain victories, people is not defeat, and I think that's a more important thing. Maybe it's tired. In Greece it's very obvious because of the length of this 4 years of resistance, but globally people are not defeated. So there is still the will to fight, and I think that this is the most important element when we analyze the context. And then I think that when discussing the new movements that have emerged, the new struggles, and how socialist organizations, how to relate with them, there are some insights that are important, I think, to understand, to make sure that the left is able to connect with the new phase. I think that the first element is that when something new appears, you have to be inside, and then when you are inside, you discuss the limits and so on. But when the square movement began in Spain, our automatic reaction was to be inside, and then from inside the movement, let's discuss what problems and so on, not from outside, which is would have been a very sectarian mistake. I think the first is that it's clear that a new generation of militant has emerged, which is basically of form of young people, young precarious students and so on. In some countries, their identity is as youth people. In other places, as students. Sometimes both identities, as student or youth workers, are more or less the same, no matter the place. For example, in Spain, the movement was not framed as a student movement. It was more a general youth movement, but in fact the social base is young students with no jobs or very bad jobs and so on. It's a new generation with a very big disaffection of traditional mainstream politics, which also includes traditional far-left groups, not only institutional parties and parliamentary democracy and so on. And also it's a young generation whose political socialization is directly linked with new technologies, social networks, and so on. I think this question is also an important one because of the debates that there is on the left about new technologies, social networks, and so on. I think, of course, we cannot adopt the simplistic media analysis of new technologies, but in the same time, I think that it's important to stress the strategic role that new technologies have played, not only in the Arab Spring, but also in the rebellions in Southern Europe. In the sense that they have been very effective tools, not only to communicate, but also they have been places of politicization, strategic arenas of political debates through which a lot of people enter into politics. And I think that we live in a moment, or in a sort of society in which traditional socialization spaces at workplace, at neighborhood are collapsing, are destroying, and that makes that communication is it's time to time it's more strategic for any kind of social movement. I think there is a growing techno-communicative dependency of social movements because you live in a society in which the face-to-face social ties are going down, even in Southern Europe where society links are still stronger and so on. So I think that for any socialist group, for any political organization, to have a good understanding of this element and a coherent politics in terms of communication is very important. It's not just enough to have a good program and good ideas. You have to explain to people and you have to communicate to people and so on. Then I think also when we analyze all the mass rebellions in the periphery of Europe, I think that one of the most important points is that they have been very politicized movements. I mean, for example, the Spanish movement had the slogan, "They don't represent us." Somehow you can read as anti-political slogan, but in reality it was a very political rejection of mainstream politics. So it was a movement that was directly focused towards the political system, towards the state, basically because a simple economic struggle is not enough to solve a problem that obviously it's a global political thing. And this makes that in all the countries in which we have had mass rebellions, it's clear that society is becoming more politicized, although in a very contradictory way. We begin from very low, and this politicization is sometimes very contradictory, it's not clear, it can lead to very different things, but the question of politics is much more clear than some years ago. And in a moment in which, in a certain way, the movements can lead to a very deep radicalization, and in certain cases can lead to very superficial criticisms. When you take indigenous movement in Spain, the political outcome of this could be a very deep project of political change or a very superficial one, and the two sides coexist in the same time. You have a dynamics of radicalization, but in the same time this radicalization has limits because of the weakness of the left, because there are no victories, because of the lack of strategic coherence and so on. Sometimes this radicalization is more about forms of struggle than in programmatic demands. So there is this dynamics in which how this can crystallize politically remains very unclear. And I think that the most important question here is how to move from a dynamic of social rebellion towards the building of a more stable and coherent social bloc. I think that if you take, for example, the dynamics of square movements, neighborhood assemblies, and so on, the problem is how to rebuild new mass effective tools of political participation in a context in which mass parties are not anymore there, unions become every day more empty from below, but in the same time, things like neighborhood assemblies and so on are very ephemerical. they are not lasting in time. So I think that the question here is how to build a bloc, a social bloc, in a society in which which is very gelatinous, in which the social glue is very unstable. And I think that one of the strategic questions is how to be able to build a sort of political and social bloc that is able to match unity with plurality. How to avoid the postmodern celebration of fragmentation for one side, and from the other side, how to avoid simplistic analysis of society that are based in a very reductionist class analysis that don't understand gender, ethnicity, environmentalism, and so on. I think the way how to think unity in plurality, and how to understand the complexity of social contradictions that in some countries, like in Britain or in Spain, also include the national questions and other elements that makes even more complex the shape of a political project. And just to end, I think that concerning the left, I think that if you analyze country by country in Europe, all austerity governments are being punished electorally. No government is able to survive 4 years of austerity, but the political, what comes after this is very unclear. This can lead to far-right parties, to left alternatives like Syriza, or to sort of anti-politics, Beppe Grillo Italian style. So I think we're in a situation that is very volatile. In countries hit by austerity, the political traditional party systems begin to collapse, and then there is a vacuum that can be filled by no matter what. I think that globally it's clear that the left has problems in Europe to capitalize this situation. Apart from Greece, even before the rise of Syriza, in Greece the left was always strong in terms of number of members and so on, but I think globally the left is weak in Europe, not only weak when it comes to elections, but weak organizationally, weak culturally, weak politically, and so on. And I think that in this context, the rise of Syriza in Greece has been very important, because not only for what Syriza is, I think that concerning the analysis of Syriza, we should avoid either idealization, either sectarism, but I think that apart from the analysis of what Syriza is, the most interesting element is what Syriza represents for the European left. I think the more than the real Syriza, the interesting thing is the symbol of Syriza, because it shows that it's possible to organize a mass political alternative, and it shows to people that doing politics is a good way to fight. I mean, when Syriza rise in the elections, for example, the debate in the Spanish state was how we can build something similar in Spain. And all the people that, before the rise of Syriza, never thought about doing politics, and just they did social resistance, began to think it's necessary to do politics. So I think it's this symbol that has to be taken outside Greece, and to use this example to build, not to replicate Syriza, that's not the idea, but to put on the table the need also to organize not only in the social level, but also in the political level. In spite of these weaknesses, the situation of the left is very different from country to country. In the most affected countries by the crisis, well, there are countries in which we have good political tools that we can build, like Portugal, for example, with the left bloc. Have countries like Italy, where the left has just vanished, and countries like Spain, where we're in a mixed situation. The left is there, but it's not effective, it is not an alternative, and the debate is how we build something new that can represent a mass alternative in a moment where the two-party system is collapsing. I think that the global issue is that in a context where society is being shaken by all austerity policies, in a moment in which all domains of social life are being shaken violently by austerity and by financial capital, how to reorganize also the left in this context. And in a moment in which society is being reshaped, somehow the left also has to be reshaped. And I've got the feeling that the question how to build a new political tool, it's very different country by country. When, for example, I heard the debates in Britain around Ken Loach's appeal and so on, and how to build a broad issue in Britain, and I compare with the debates in Spain, when we win broad, it's not exactly the same. I mean, when we win broad in Britain, I guess it's to have something that can have a certain mass audience to begin to exist in the political life. In countries where the political system is collapsing, broad today means that we are thinking how to win an election. The debate in a country like Spain is, is from time to time more similar to the sort of debates we had in Latin America in the past decade. It's collapsing of the political system, and then a sort of reorganization of society, an increasing need to build a political tool, but not to exist in the political life, but to have a very urgency to take power. I mean, even mentally, a lot of people have moved from the idea of change the world without taking power to feel extreme urgency to take power in 24 hours a day. I mean, the idea is how we get rid of people in the government. And this creates very confusing debates. Because the question is not how to have a concrete political tool, but how to become a majority, how to pass from anything to more than 50%. And for example, in countries like Spain, the day we have a new political tool, it will be something extremely confusing, extremely messy. I don't know even the level that we will be able to put it. And in this context, I think that what we have to do is to keep the building of an anti-capitalist organization, but with a lot of tactical flexibility, and to try to make sure that the new broad tools that can be built here or there have the most advanced program and strategy of social change. And this will be more advanced or not depending on each situation, but how to push that the new things that we build go as far as possible in their commitment to change things when it comes to their program, their strategy, and their everyday practice. But in some countries, this will represent extremely confusing new profile political tools. And I think, just to end, well, I think that in this context, it's very important to keep a good balance in building an organization that is rooted on a political tradition and a political understanding of capitalism and history of capitalism and so on, and in the same time to be open to the new dynamics. I think that globally the left has to be reshaped in a combination between the old left and the new things emerging. I think that the proportion to make the menu may change, but globally is how to unite the existing left and how to attract to politics the people who are politicized, who are in movements, but who are reluctant to be organized yet. I think the historical goal is how to attract into party politics or into politics in general people that are already committed in unions, in movements, and so on, but don't find a place where to act because they are reluctant, and with good historical reasons of the left and of the far left, and in general of party politics in general for the historical reasons that we know. And I think that makes that when we think of how to build a political project today, that means that we have to think in build political organizations that appear as real 21st century organizations, not as a tiny, small dinosaurs of another political period. How to build organizations that are attractive to people, that talk to people with the language and the ways that people understand. How to build organizations that appear as something that are in phase, in synchrony with the current time, and in the same time without meaning that this means to adapt to the last fashion and to the last superficial ideas that you can find everywhere. Is how to keep this historical understanding of the present time, and in the same time how to be able to build new political tools that are in synchrony and can match with the younger generation of activists. And I think that globally, the only thing that we can say for sure is that it's not time for business as usual in the left. Thank you.